Hey YouTube, in this video I'm going to be going over my review of the RX 480. This is going to be a gaming performance review, and then we're going to be looking at a couple of games that I actually play. So this is going to represent real world rather than just typical synthetics and all the stuff that you can find from other reviewers. So I think my results are in line for the most part with what reviewers have shown, but I'm not going to show Firestrike, I'm not going to show Unigine, Heaven, or Valley. I don't see the point in doing that. So I had to run through a bunch of the games that I had to test them on a bunch of old graphics cards. So that's very time consuming, so props to the reviewers out there that take the time to do all this, because it was an interesting experience actually learning to benchmark games repeatedly, doing multiple runs, getting averages, putting all the numbers in Excel, generating the graphs and stuff like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So this is going to be on the reference RX 480 as shown in the image here. Mine is actually an XFX one that's slightly factory overclocked to 1288, but it's still a reference card, and it is an actual retail model. It is not a review sample. So let's get right into it here. So the test setup, all cards tested at stock were inside a case. So again, I'm going for real world. This is like a consumer's look at how the actual product performs rather than a reviewer or someone who was given the card for free, so I'd actually go buy it. So I actually tested it in my one of my gaming computers. I actually have two computers, but this one is going to be the one that has the FX 8350 overclocked to 4.7 gigahertz. So this essentially makes it like an FX 9590, which is almost in the ballpark of a stock quad-core i7, but still not quite there. But for the most part, DX11 games, which are the majority of what was tested here, if not all of them, do not suffer from CPU bottlenecks as much as older DX9 games. So I feel like the 8350 represents a good mid-range sort of scenario that you'd see out in the real world, as opposed to all these people running high-end i7s or even X99 motherboards. So the motherboard is a Crosshair 5 Formula Z, so it is a pretty high-end motherboard. It's probably the most high-end you could get for the AM3 Plus platform, but it's what I have, so that's what I tested it with. The RAM is 16 gigabytes of DDR3. This is the AMD Performance Series memory that's clocked at 1866 megahertz with CL9 timings. So it's relatively good memory for DDR3. It's not super overkill like 2400, but this sort of memory was back. Keep in mind that this is an older platform, which people are probably going to be upgrading to. They're going to probably be swapping out old 7000 series Radeon cards, or 600 series GTX cards, or even 500 series or 400 series GTX cards, depending on how old their computer is. So anyway, 1866 represents pretty good to kind of prevent a RAM bottleneck. And the power supply is my XFX, which is actually a Seasonic branded power supply, which is XFX branded, but it's a Seasonic manufactured power supply. So 850 watt, 80 plus silver. So it's pretty good. It can handle Crossfire. So I do want to do one disclaimer. The RX 480, just keep in mind that this is a reference card. I may go back and revisit the custom AIB cards like the Sapphire Nitro or something when it comes out later, because when I get one of those, I'll probably do the overclock. I'm not overclocking this card because there's no point. It's severely power limited. So it's best to just run it at stock, and most people are going to buy this and just run it at stock. They're just going to buy the card, they're going to go to Microcenter, get the card, or Best Buy, or order it off of Newegg or something, and they're going to get it in the mail, or they're going to get it from the store. They're going to they're going to shut off their computer, take out the old graphics card, plug in the new graphics card, plug it all back together, turn it on, and start playing games. I mean, that's how I did it, and that's pretty much how it's going to be in the real world anyway. So the tested cards we'll go over here. I did test it with all these graphics cards, are graphics cards that I purchased with my own money. I did not have to borrow them. I was not given one of them. So these are the prices that I actually paid from the store or from the online e-tailer or what have you. This is what I actually paid to get all these cards. And this is over the course of about 4.5 years maybe. Let's see, from 2012. It goes back as far as 2012 if you see the 7000 series from AMD, which was my older graphics cards. So the You'll notice that the MSI, okay, well, there's only 2 NVIDIA cards because those are the only 2 that I have. So this is, again, real world, and these are kind of in the price range, or the RX 480 is in the price range of those cards anyway, so I feel like this is still a pretty good sample. So the first contender we have here is the limited edition $350 at time of purchase MSI GTX 970 100ME, that stands for Million Edition. This is arguably one of the most successful GPUs of all time. If you look at the Steam survey, you'll see that there's a lot of people, like 5% of Steam gamers, use this graphics card. The one that's shown here, this green one, this is the exact one that I have that I tested. This is the 100ME. I feel like it represents NVIDIA better because it goes with the whole green and black GeForce theme. I think that the red and black kind of is meant for AMD, so I wouldn't get that one. But anyway, this is also the one that comes with the backplate. This is the only MSI Twin Frozer GTX 970 that comes with the backplate. It has to be the green and black one. So that's the way I roll. I gotta go for that bling, that style. So this is the one I have. Next, I've got my EVGA GTX 960. This card is really good at power consumption. I feel like its best selling point is the low power consumption, the low heat output, and that sort of thing. But it is a little bit disappointing in terms of its overall 1080p gaming performance, as we'll see in the benchmarks. But it is still a highly successful graphics card. A lot of people I know have this card. GM206, it is the smaller Maxwell. It's like the little brother to the GTX 970. So I paid $230 for this card. That's what I have. Next, we'll move into some of the older graphics cards that I have. This is the last gen upper mainstream, the Pitcairn XT. So this is the fully unlocked Pitcairn GPU. Pitcairn is a pretty famous name now because this graphics card has lasted almost an eternity in terms of the technology world. It was originally released, I believe, in February or March of 2012, so that gives you an idea of how old it is. And it got rebranded back in 2013. After it had been out for like a year and a half, it got changed to the name, the R9 270X. So I remember playing BioShock Infinite on this when I got this card. It was BioShock and Tomb Raider 2013 were brand new. So I got this card to test it later to upgrade from the 7850. So this is the fully unlocked one, and it is a pretty nice graphics card for what it was. Next we have the little brother of the 7870. So we have the PS4 I call it the PS4 in PC form. This is because this is essentially a PS4. This is what the PS4 is based off of. The 28 nanometer Pitcairn Pro. When it was new, it was like a $200. I think it was actually up to a $250 card when it was brand new. For the 2GB version, the one I have is actually the 2GB version, so it's the one shown here. For those wondering, the pictures shown are of the actual SKU or the actual graphics card that I actually have. So the one I have looks exactly like this, and the 7870 looks exactly like that. And this is my EVGA one. This is what the cooler looks like, and that's what the MSI one looks like. So this one, it has a single 6-pin power connector, just like the RX 480. Again, it was similar when it was brand new. It launched with similar price points, so it was like $250 max. It was like you could get it. I got mine for $220 back in 2012. So to play Guild Wars 2 on this, and it ran Guild Wars 2 maxed out at 1080. It was really nice. So I call PS4 because if you have this card today, this card essentially is giving you PS4 performance in terms of the games at 1080p. Next, we have the flagship of AMD's 7000 series. This is the Tahiti XT. So this is my Asus Matrix Platinum. It was a very expensive card back in the day when it was like the super performance king, when it was the fastest card in the market. Essentially, this card's rival was the GTX 680, and then eventually it also became the GTX 770 when it got upgraded to the 7970 gigahertz edition, which is actually what this one is. And then NVIDIA countered with 770, and then AMD eventually rebadged them as the R9 280X. So this is a pretty beefy card, as you can see. It's a 250 watt TDP card that can drive up to 6 monitors, and it is a triple slot card. but it is extremely quiet. It's very quiet, but there was a couple of design flaws with the Asus model, but we won't really get into the Asus part of it. Next, we have the Hawaii XT. So this was the replacement to the Tahiti XT in terms of the highest performance that AMD came out with back in 2013. This was the high-performance 1080p King. It actually was the fastest. When it first came out, it was the fastest graphics card on the market because the only thing NVIDIA had at the time was the GTX 780, but NVIDIA did remedy that with the release of the GTX 780 Ti very shortly after the 290X launched. So that... so I actually got this one right when Maxwell came out. So I got this in 2014 when Maxwell launched, because when the GTX 970 came out, it forced the price of the 290X and the 290 down significantly. So this card was originally like a $550 card, so I got mine for $370. And this is the PCS. This is the PowerColor PCS Plus. So these cards were known for high wattage. So you definitely need like a triple fan cooler to have a legitimate noise and thermal level. Otherwise, if you had like a 2-fan or a really small graphics card, it was not adequately cooling this. It would be too loud. Finally, we have the last contender here. This is my this is my Radeon GTX R9 Fury. So this is the Sapphire Dual-X one. This is the first one. This one and the Asus Strix were the first two available. The Sapphire later revised it to the Nitro series. But this one is the fastest graphics card I own currently. I paid $545 for it. It is really, really good. I would consider it like the highest I would ever go in terms of 1080p pricing. Like for 1080p gaming, I probably wouldn't buy anything above this. I guess now that the 980 Ti has fallen in price, I mean, that's pretty tempting, I would say, but I don't think that NVIDIA will support that card like 2 years from now. It won't really get the driver updates that it needs, so I feel like the 1070 would probably be a better value at this point. But anyway, Fiji Pro, when it came out, it was arguably better than Fiji XT because Fiji XT had that liquid cooler, and most people out there, I feel, would not use a liquid cooler. They just don't want to put it in their system. So, I mean, there's a lot. You'd be surprised how many people out there just don't like the idea of having the liquid, having a radiator or stuff inside their computer. So I feel like the Fiji Pro was definitely the way to go. This card in particular is the quietest graphics card in history. Like, I don't think there's anything that can match this card in terms of its noise performance. Like, literally, you can never hear the fan spin. If you're like me, and if you have your PC on the floor, in a case, you'll never really hear it. So, like, ever. Like, even when you're maxing out games. So, extremely nice graphics card. This is probably my favorite graphics card that I've ever purchased. But now we move on to the new king of price performance. For 1080p gaming, we have the 249 XFX RX 480. So this is the one that you guys saw in my unboxing video. So people are probably waiting to see how it performs. I'll tell you right now, it's very good. The results that I got as a actual consumer reviewing the card, reviewing the product for what it is actually quite successful. So currently, if you check Microcenter, it's all sold out. Newegg is probably the same. They probably have a couple. But it's sold out in the first day, which is pretty good, even though AMD was touting very high supply, unlike the 1070 and the 1080 launch. They still managed to sell a ton of these cards. So you can see, like, the 199 is the 4GB one. And the nice thing about it is these cards kept to their MSRP for the most part. Like, the only one out there, like the 249, is kind of like a $10 or $20 hike in the price. For the XFX one, that's because it has the backplate. But yeah, for the most part, they all stayed about what I expected them to be priced at, and so that's pretty nice to see. These are all reference coolers. We'll see the custom coolers in probably like 2-3 weeks maybe. We'll see, maybe sooner. But it does represent very good performance for money. So if we compare it to a similar priced product from NVIDIA, we would have to compare it directly to the GTX 960. In terms of price, like if you're looking at price, if I'm somebody who walks into Microcenter or Best Buy and I say I want to buy I got like $250, I want to buy a graphics card, I want to buy the best one, You have to pick between the GTX 960, which currently goes for these prices at Microcenter, versus the RX 480. So you can see not a single one of these here are under $200, but you probably can find some rebates or some decent deals on these. But at this point, this card, in my opinion, we're at a transition period where this card is irrelevant. So I definitely would not recommend buying a GTX 960 at this point, especially since the GTX 1060 is on the horizon and the RX 480 is a thing and it exists. So next we have more price drops due to RX 480 entering the market. So we have the GTX 970, which is very similar in performance to the RX 480 in terms of what I found from my own internal testing. But you can see here that even though the GTX 970 is similar, and sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse than the 480, its price is still more expensive than the RX 480. I guess that's because of its reputation. It's very well known. A lot of people see that it's a popular graphics card, so retailers are going to try to keep that price as high as they can to get their profit. So right now, I guess if you want a GTX 970, I would recommend looking for one that's as close to $300 as possible. If you can find one with the rebates that are like $280, $270, $270, then it may be worth it. But again, just keep in mind that you're on it's kind of like buying last year's model. It's on the way out. It's gonna go EOL. Like, I just never feel comfortable buying graphics cards that are in that situation, especially when you've got one that's cheaper and is potentially going to be better over time. And then we also have from AMD's camp, we also have price drops on the R9 390. So this one actually fell significantly more than the GTX 970, and I can understand why. First of all, it's not as popular. It's pretty much equal to the 970 in terms of performance, with margin of error and depending on the game. But this one, you can actually get it for what, like there's one that's 270 XFX one, but that one's probably not a very good cooled one. Like, looking at these three here, knowing how hot the R9 390 gets and how much power it consumes, the only one on here that I would recommend is the MSI one. The MSI one is the best one. It has the best cooler. You can see that it's taller, it's thicker than the others, so it has more metal to absorb all that heat and all that power. So that's really the only one on this list that I would consider. For the GTX 970, like I said, the best one here is probably the one that I have, which is in the middle, which is the MSI one, because it's cheaper than the others, and it has a backplate. And then finally move on to the graphics card that is slightly higher performing than the RX 480. This is the R9 390X. This one actually got a significant price drop. So this one was originally a $430 graphics card. I remember a year ago when it first came out, it was $439, meant to compete with the GTX 980. And it, for the most part, it managed to hold its own. This is basically Granada XT, which is the reincarnation of the Hawaii XT or the 290X that I have, just with better VRAM. Mainly it's just the VRAM is a lot better. It's Hynix memory, and it's like 1.5 gigahertz, so it's effectively like 6,000 megahertz on the memory. So it's a lot more memory bandwidth, and it's 8 gigs of RAM, but it's like, I don't know, it's kind of an older platform. Again, it's the high power consumption, and it also doesn't have all the platform updates that the RX 480 has. So moving on to the projected average price comparison. So this is my projected. So what it means by projected, compared to other cards where we actually have good pricing data, we can see like how, on average, how much that card cost in the market. The RX 480 is brand new, but I really don't think that it'll go above $230 for the average life, which means by the time the RX 480 is going out the door, but by the time it's in the situation that the GTX 960 is in right now, it'll probably be like less than $200. I'm pretty sure it'll be like you can get it for like $170 at that point, but that's if you're waiting like 2 years or like a year and a half or something. So I project it to be, on average, it's going to cost people $230. So right now it's new, so it'll be above that number, but then later on when it's old, it'll be below that number. So that's kind of what I feel, and that this does take into account the custom cooled AIBs. So if you compare it to some of the other ones, like the GTX 970, That card, I remember it going for like 380 at one point, and then it's now fallen, of course, because it's going EOL. And the 290X was originally 550, but it was quickly shot down when Maxwell came out, where it fell to like 300, and at some point you could even find it for like 290 for the 290X, which was highly recommended at the time at that low of a price. But you can see like some like higher end cards like the R9 Fury, which is similar to the GTX 980 in terms of the price. The GTX 980 is now a little bit cheaper because it's not as strong, and it's also on the way out. So you can see what a high-end, like enthusiast level almost pricing looks like over the course of time. So you can see how much more money that would be required there, that 500 figure, compared to some of the other stuff. So that's kind of what this chart's showing, average price of cards lifetime. So now we'll move into the gaming benchmarks, because I think people are probably getting tired of listening to me talk about all this stuff. So we're going to go over the MMO gaming. So modern MMO gaming, this is Final Fantasy 14 Heavensward. This is the DX11 benchmark that they released. It's a very nice benchmark, actually. But this game is a GameWorks title, by the way. But the nice thing about Final Fantasy and just, I guess, Square Enix and how they optimize their games, even though it uses GameWorks technologies, specifically HBAO+, the AMD cards don't suffer from it. Like, you can see that there's so you can see at the bottom there, the RX 480 averaged 74 FPS compared to the GTX 970's 85 FPS, so it's significantly slower than it. But again, you saw my prices just now, so you can see that the 970 is more expensive, so it's higher performing, and this is a GameWorks title. So but what's more interesting to look at here is how it compares to the GTX 960, which only averages 56 FPS on maximum at 1080p. And you can see how it is a big improvement over the previous generation. So if you look at the YXT, the R9 290X is averaging 70 FPS. I believe the 390 is very similar to that, and then the 390X is probably 75 or 76 FPS. If I had to guess, it would be very similar to the RX 480. So that's a very good score for the price. I mean, you can max this MMO game. This is a modern DX11 MMO game. The next expansion probably is going to have a DX12 API, because when this game first came out, it was a DX9 game. Then the expansion came out last year, and it was upgraded to DX11, so I assume that they're going to upgrade it again to DX12. So very good performance numbers here for a GameWorks title game, and it's an MMO game, which represents a large percentage of people. Like, I guess MMOs are sort of kind of their own niche market now, but this is just one of the games I play, and this is just one of the benchmarks I could run. Next, we've got adventure and third-person action games. So this is Tomb Raider 2013. Unfortunately, I do not have the new Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, that came out earlier this year for PC. I will get it eventually once it's on sale or something, but I just have too many games on my backlog. But I do have 2013, and the benchmark is still pretty relevant here. You can see RX 480 scored a 88 average at 1080p, and this is on the ultimate setting. It's like everything turned up, so that's why you see the other, like the older graphics cards scoring so low. So the 7870 can only score 37. The GTX 960 is at 51. The R9 280X is at 54. So you can see the RX 480 for a $200 to $250 card, that's very good. So it's like literally on par with the 970 at the 290X, if not beating both of them slightly. So then, and if you compare it to the value of, like, it's half the price of a R9 Fury, you can see that it scales pretty well for the dollar. Next, we've got single-player FPS games. So I've got BioShock Infinite here. So the distinction between these two is, I said this is third person because obviously the game engine is having to render Lara Croft all the time and all her hair and all that stuff. So this one's a little bit more taxing than BioShock. BioShock Infinite also, again, very good performance, 93 FPS. For, again, this is a 2013 game. You can see, I feel like this game, just by looking at the results, it does look like NVIDIA's drivers are pretty well optimized for this game, seeing as the 970 did win by pretty good margin, 13 FPS on the average there. So it could be just a driver thing, or just that's just how the architectures differ in terms of how they handle the different levels of the depth of field and the tessellation and stuff like that. But obviously, it's highly playable at 1080p on the RX 480, so it's still a very good result in my opinion. Next, we've got Metro Last Light. Metro Last Light is a much more taxing game compared to BioShock. So you can see that it brings the PS4, so the 7850, or aka PS4 or 370 or R7 370, down to just over 30 FPS at 31. Its bigger brother is 10 FPS faster from what I found, which is quite surprising in terms of the difference there. But then the GTX 960 is able to almost reach 60, but just not quite. Same thing with the R9 280X. They're about the same there, possibly within margin of error. And then the Fury, again, 99. That's just overkill for 1080p for this game, if you've only got a 60 Hz monitor. And then you've got the other three, which are all pretty much on par, in line with each other, with 1 to 2 FPS difference. With the RX 480 competing with the Hawaii XT and the Maxwell GM204. So that's again, Metro Last Light I feel is a pretty neutral game. It doesn't use any great GameWorks technology or even any of AMD's open source technologies. So it's still a pretty decent test case here. And then we have puzzle solvers, or I guess you could even consider them platformers, because you can jump quite a bit in this game. If you have very high FPS, you can actually jump and like hack through a lot of the levels. But anyway, the Telos Principle, I like this game a lot. It's one of my favorite single-player PC games. And I'm happy to see that the RX 40 did score very well, over 90 FPS at 91 on the average. This game is it's pretty much neutral. Like, it's not, I don't really see it going either way, but I do see that the Telos Principle, based off of these numbers here that I got, that it does actually scale well with the memory bandwidth available to a graphics card and the overall like amount of horsepower, like the number of shaders and all that kind of stuff. Because typically the AMD cards have higher like T-flop count compared to the NVIDIA ones. So you'd expect them in theory to do better, but because of the amount of optimization that is put into NVIDIA's game drivers, the NVIDIA cards can perform very well, thanks to software. Where it looks like Telos Principle just scales very well with just hardware itself. So you can see from these results, that's probably a good explanation as to why the R9 290X does beat out the RX 480, just because it has a wider memory bus and better memory bandwidth. And then finally we move on to the only DirectX 12 game that I have at this time to test. So this slide represents Hitman Absolution's results for DirectX 11 and 12. So 11 is the blue bar, 12 is the orange bar. And you can see that for the older graphics cards, it looks as though at least for the ones that are capped at like 256-bit memory bus, so that would be the Pitcairn cards up at the top here, they actually lose out slightly in performance moving to DirectX 12. So that could either be just like the platform is just not very good for DX12, or it's just older, I guess, and DX12 just has some newer features that those cards just can't handle that well. And then GTX 960 does lose a little bit of performance there as well, moving to the modern DirectX 12. And then we have the old Tahiti 7970, which does see a marginal benefit here of like 1 FPS. So we have R9 Fury, again, it gains a little bit there, and then 290X gains a little bit. It seems like 2 FPS, 1 to 2 FPS for these higher end cards here. And then we see Maxwell does suffer due to the lack of async compute, so it does lose a couple of FPS, but it's not too big, although 60 FPS is pretty much what everybody wants. So the fact that it fell below 60 on the average means that the smoothness is probably not as good on DX12. And then the RX 480 does manage, well, I scored 75. It was actually 75.4 and 75.1, I believe. So I just rounded it 75 because I didn't see it as a significant difference in the results there. But yeah, very good results for a $200 to $250 card on DX12. So I would say this is a pretty good modern piece of hardware here. And then for the power consumption, I just threw it in. So I do have my little $15 wall power watt meter thing from Fry's Electronics. So I did have that plugged into the PC's wall outlet the whole time I was doing these tests. So these are the power consumption numbers I got. So you can see, this is the reason why I called the GTX 960 the low power king, because it won the power consumption. Actually, well, if you look at it, technically the PS4 or the R7 370 won, but it doesn't perform as good. It's nowhere near as good as the 960 in terms of the gaming performance, so that's why I still gave the win to the 960, because it's the performance per power or whatever that counts, or watt per performance or frame. And then we have the old Tahiti with like 318 total. Keep in mind, this is the total computer. This is like the whole computer pulling power from the wall. So you can see Hawaii does live up to its reputation of being a high power, high wattage consumption GPU, almost at 400 watts in the benchmarks that I did run. So that was pretty much the average that I got if I took all those numbers and then I ran through Excel. Fiji was more like it used less power than Hawaii, which is good. I mean, that's what they planned. That was the whole goal of using HBM last year. And then the RX 480, very close to GTX 970, and this result does not surprise me at all, because if you look at it, GTX 970 is advertised as a 145 watt TDP card. The RX 480 is advertised as a 150 watt TDP card, so I would expect it to be slightly more, and that does show right here, but they're pretty much the same. So they perform about the same in games, and they use about the same amount of power, which is very good. Seeing as how the RX 480 is a modern platform, it goes to, like, I would tell you this, it has new DisplayPort 1.4, so it's gonna have the high dynamic range support for the newer monitors. It has FreeSync available, so the monitors are much cheaper. The FreeSync monitor that I have is an AOC 22-inch monitor, 1080p. With the FreeSync range of 35 Hertz all the way to 75 Hertz, which is pretty nice because that's only a $120 monitor and it has FreeSync. Good luck trying to find a $120 G-Sync monitor that's only 22-inch, so you can't fit like 3 of those easily. So I mean, that's the nice value proposition. I feel like definitely it is probably better value for money compared to the 970, just because it's newer, so it has the promise of being able to support the newer technologies. I mean, you're getting HDMI 2.0B, finally, AMD has HDMI 2.0B, and DisplayPort 1.4. You're getting the same power characteristics of the GTX 970, and once the custom AIBs come out, you'll get potentially a really nice overclocked card from the factory, or even a card that you could overclock yourself to pretty good numbers. We'll see. Probably will definitely scale beyond 970. So anyway, guys, that was going to be it for my review of the RX 480. I bet this is a pretty long video, but anyone who stuck around, highly recommend the card. If you can wait, I would recommend the AIB cards, because the AIB cards typically are the ones that you'll see stand the test of time. As you can see, all the ones that are for sale here from the retailers are custom cards, but those will be coming out in a couple of weeks. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed that video, and thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.